A word to the wise. We are an explicit podcast tackling choicey adult themes as well as entering spoiler territory if you aren't caught up with us in the section that we are reading.
Hey there, this is Cross.
And I'm PJ.
And we are Words and Whiskey, a podcast for veteran and novice readers alike. We tackle fiction novels and love to talk about what we're drinking. You can think of us as your drunk weekly book club.
And drunk we are, Crossland. As mentioned before in the previous episode, our
episode. Wait.
Oh shit! This is some timeline shit right now. All right, the very first episode. The very first episode of this podcast is our short story of product placement, where we talk about how we're doing a 2-for-1, recording 2 at once. This is the second episode of that week, or of that night. And on top of everything, Crossland and I just took a shot.
Now we're feeling good. This shouldn't be a problem. Yeah, we've only got about 100 pages to cover.
Yeah, no worries. We're well lubricated, I think is the right way to put it.
Yes. Starting hot, as they say.
Too hot. All right.
Too hot. So today we'll be discussing up to chapter 29 in part 3 of Red Rising, subtitled Gold. So up to chapter 29, not through in our copies. That's page 218.
I don't know yet what happens after the end of 28, but you'll know when you hit the fucking oh shit mark. You'll be like, all right, yeah, that's the right place to stop. I hate you, Crossland, for making me stop reading right there. I hate you so goddamn much.
Dude, when I was reading through to pick out chapters to get this going for you, I was like, I know whatever point we approach, the cliffhanger to lead PJ on is the Titus reveal. Yeah. And I was so pleased that you were so stressed out by that reveal. It's satisfying to be.
Yeah. So like if you forget, if you're reading along and for some reason you've listened to the intro to this episode but haven't read the book yet, you'll know.
You'll know. You also know if you've gone too far, but it'll be fine. So first, let's talk about what we're drinking. What are you having now for part 2 tonight?
So I have a sidecar. I made myself a sidecar. So that is Cointreau, cognac, and lemon juice.
Sounds good.
I think it's 1 ounce of Cointreau, 1.5 ounces of cognac, and 0.75 ounces of lemon juice. I think I doubled it though. I don't remember. I made it before the other episode. It's just been sitting on my desk, so all the ice is gone. I knew we were...
Did you have to restir it?
No. I didn't restir it. Usually it's not served on ice, but just to keep it cold, I just put some ice cubes in there. Sure. So now a little bit more voluminous, a little bit less strong, but still cold. So we're good. Following that is Raindrops by Barrel Theory. It's a straight New England IPA, Citra and Mosaic. Just tasty. Tasty.
Mm-hmm.
I'm happy with it.
And I know I lied in the first episode and said that I was having a cocktail to follow it up. I do not actually have a cocktail. I am following up the Scotch with whiskey. So we've switched from the Macallan 12 in our Time Warped episode to rye bullet bourbon with a chaser of a Stone FML.
All right. I think that's the same thing you had last time. Well, the FML was.
I was going to say, FML has been my kind of like go-to chaser beer. It's strong. It's good. It's
a solid beer.
Yeah.
Nothing too insanely like flavorful that you have to like sit and really think about it. You can just enjoy it for what it is.
It's just a double IPA. Like it's just a solid double IPA. Yeah. So this week we've got a lot of shit to talk about. This, in theory, will probably be one of our longest episodes so far, but I feel like I've done a good job of paring it back.
Big picture, zoom out a little bit kind of analysis.
Yeah. And we get some interesting big picture stuff, right? So to start off, the beginning of this chapter, we left our hero before he read this massive chunk with a ton of stuff that happens, reeling from having to brutally murder Julian in the passage.
Right.
Though I am alone, I know I will soon find others. They want me to soak in the guilt for now. They want me to lonely, mournful, so that when I meet the others, the winners, I will be relieved. The murders will bind us, and I will find company of the winner a salve to my guilt. I do not love my fellow students, but I will think I do. Darrow's been put through the shit.
And it seemed to me that he cares less about the fact that he just killed someone and more about having to face Cassius. Mm-hmm. What did we decide on?
It's Cassius.
Cassius. Going forward, at least. Right here, obviously, he's mostly talking about himself and like what he's thinking, but he's kind of removing himself from the situation by thinking about like, what are the architects of this curriculum intending? Mm-hmm. And I feel like that's probably a pretty good way to like really rationally think about what's going on, break down what's happening to you without getting overly emotional about it. I think it makes sense.
Yeah, I feel like that's very on message. He is very much interpreting it as this is what they want me to pull from the experience. And we learned a little bit more from Roke in a bit, but and that's also what they're going for is exactly what Darrow is thinking and feeling.
Yeah.
So part of my perspective on this that I thought was interesting is the tunnel, the passage, the culling, it seems to reflect each of our characters in interesting ways. What do you pick up on this with the characters that are explicitly spoken about?
I mean, it's very clear that there were lambs for the slaughter, and they're not really shy about it. Like there were half of the students chosen explicitly because they were weak and would not put up much of a fight, but they would really test the mental fortitude of the students that they actually have picked for the house. Mm-hmm. There's obviously I'm assuming Roke. Did they ever explicitly say that Roke was the upset?
Yeah, that Roke was upset. That was 100%. No. Sorry. They never said that Roke was an upset. I also don't think they ever explained.
Or Servo. Sorry, Sevro. Yeah. Not Servo.
I also
this
don't
is
think
an MST3K. Tom Servo.
I don't think that was explained, but I do agree with you.
They imply it.
Yeah.
I feel like talking about like the way he kind of looks whenever whatever golden child is mentioned, which again, not mentioned, but we're assuming that he's the one that bested him.
Yeah, Priam, right? So the fact that Priam got his throat smashed in, which I definitely have a quote of, it's alluded to that way. Titus alludes that he killed Priam, and everyone can pretty much pick up immediately that it's a lie.
Right.
You know, when they hit that. What do you think of Roke's reading from the passage as well as Antonia's? Like Roke was actually broken up and upset. Yeah,
Roke is like they talked about him as being sort of the poet and a little bit more of the artsy kind of guy. At least that's the way I kind of understood it, which tells me not necessarily, and by no means a rule, but it tells me probably a little bit more emotional than the rest of the students and emotionally driven. And I don't really have a good rationale behind that. That's just kind of the read I got.
Yeah, that's fair.
So I guess it makes sense that he'll be a little bit more broken up over the fact that he had to murder one of his fellow students in cold blood. Like, it's kind of a fucked up thing to do. And clearly it haunts him.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think the other part of it, too, is that Roke kind of knew that this was coming. It's not so specific as to say his mom's a member of the board, right? Which is the genetic board that's in charge of everything. And I love that Roke gives us kind of a peek behind the evolutionary Darwinistic curtain, right? Like low colors are given catalysts. All births are altered to have shorter terms, except obsidians and golds. The Board of Quality Control is firmly convinced that 13.62% of all gold children should die before 1 year of age. Sometimes they make reality fit that number. Why? Because they believe civilization weakens natural selection. They do nature's work so that we do not become a soft race. And I think that like his whole peek behind that curtain from his mom's perspective, because he despises his mom who's on the board, is interesting. And I think it kind of gives way to him being upset about it because he's had time before this to kind of think about it and contemplate on how society's going and sort of the brutality of it all.
That's definitely part of the passage that I was thinking about. Like his explicit disagreement with the way that the Gold Society is run. And his closeness to the board familially.
Totally. I think the other part here that's interesting. There's two other comments here that are interesting. Antonia walks away almost enjoying the experience, right? Like she kind of like slides out and she's smiling and kind of, lithe in her own way. But then Darrow questions also, was there a reason Julian was to die? Like, why did Julian need to die? Why was he not considered an upper echelon? Yeah, he's not as good as Cassius, but why'd you throw him against me? Is he really that low?
Was he a low draft?
They never explicitly say, although it's assumed that he was probably given an artificial boost because of his status as a Bologna, right?
Right.
That's the only assumption there.
Yeah, man. But also, like, that family's pretty important.
Mm-hmm. Right. Second most important family on Mars.
If they have any enemies within the people making decisions on who fights who, that's a pretty easy, like, oh, sorry, your son got bested. Can't do anything about it. Oops, kind of deal.
Yeah, and we kind of get a peek behind that curtain too a little bit later, which I think is interesting, with something that we'll bring up when we get there. I really liked, this is just a nice piece of foreshadowing. We don't really need to talk about it too much. It is the Primus hand that will tear this house apart, and just strictly good foreshadowing. Just like plant the seed and then watch everything else unravel. And it basically all unravels over who's going to be the Primus of House Mars. That's really a majority of the story that we read.
Something I hadn't noticed, but is also foreshadowing on 144. If you are thrown into the deep end and you do not swim, you will drown, he says, and raises his thin eyebrows. So keep swimming, right? I force a chuckle, a poet's logic. But that situation plays out almost exactly later on.
Yeah, with him and Cassius in the pond. Yeah. Cool.
Hadn't made that connection. Hadn't remembered that comment.
Totally. That's also a really good call.
But he talks about it, doesn't he? He's like, I don't know how to swim, but I'm a fast learner.
Right. Actually, that's a really good call. That's like an explicit connection of those two things. Mm-hmm. It's really good. Good call, PJ. Good work.
It's like I'm learning to
look at you
to read or something.
Cheers. I'll drink for that. So
I'm not some idiot, but I definitely like. Well, I'm not some idiot all the time.
So
yeah, I am. All right.
Cassius is searching for his brother, and ultimately sitting next to his brother's killer is a deadly sort of irony. We're left with some of our main characters and given a reason as to why they survived and other didn't. Right.
Right.
And this is natural selection, right? After all, and it does have its surprises. Was there anything that surprised you?
I was surprised that Fitchner. Genuinely, my expectation, the way that Darrow was like saying like, oh, they're going to like keep us in the dark and not tell us about who killed who, just to let us like kind of eat ourselves from the inside out. I really thought Darrow was going to like deflect a question about who he killed, and then immediately like the name of the person that they killed was going to show up on their like name tag. That's really what I thought was going to happen, and immediately cause like explicit outward frustration and like anger between students.
Totally. So I similarly love that and actually noted the line. I loved Fitchner's specific glee about Priam and the death of Priam that we already talked about. And I won't say who, because that undermined the fun of this whole curriculum. But someone knocked him down onto stone and then stomped on his trachea till he died.
Right. Yeah. That stuck in my head too.
Yeah. And that just gives the like this whole combination of passage and this section is really the introduction to the brutality of the rest of the universe. We've learned that has strictly left the Hunger Games at the door, like the young adult fiction at the door. This is now brutal Games of Thrones era, or like level culling and killing and death. Any character at any time, just. So
if Cassius was to know immediately that Darrow was the one that killed his brother, do you think he would have forgiven him?
No.
No?
Nope, I don't think so. I think there's a level of pride there in Golds that demand retribution for crimes against family, especially. And I think
that's fair.
And I don't blame you for like having this impression right now. We haven't really gotten into some of the family stuff, and I don't want to allude or hint to anything. But I think this is really kind of the first incidence of what does violence against a family look like and how is it judged? And yeah, we just haven't gotten there. I don't think so, though.
Not softly.
Yeah.
I guess is the answer.
Not well. It does not go well. So Fitchner, after that, kind of makes up the Institute to almost be a natural selection aptitude test where maybe you get a job in the end, kind of like college. Like, in a way.
It seems a little bit more sure than college.
Seems more assured.
Yeah.
No, because if you get enslaved, you're ashamed, basically. Like you're almost guaranteed, unless you were like exemplar in your house, right? Like you're kidding.
Yeah, good point.
Right, like you can leave like a regular graduate.
I was just trying to make a joke about college.
True.
Like you're right, and I'm on your side, but I was just trying to make a joke about college. And fucking hard it is to find a job after college sometimes, even with a like degree in a desirable field.
True.
Anyway, that's my life. Let's go.
So I love on page 149 the term cuddle slaves.
Yeah.
And when mentioned with obsidians, and it made me laugh out loud and also like want to cry in fear.
Yeah. I was thinking cuddle slaves. So pinks, typically, is what I got out of it.
Yeah. So you think obsidians will follow little turds like you? Those baby stranglers would make you their little cuddle slaves if they saw weakness. So you must show none. Right. And that's Fitchner kind of given his encouraging speak is like, you have to own the obsidians like the low colors that they are, or else you'll be turned into their little fuck toys.
Right. But it more made a connection to what we talked about last week with the derivatives of the different colors and like the versions of the different colors still having a connection. And I had postulated that pinks were a split off of red. And this literally uses the word slave to describe what they do.
Yeah, that's fair. You're definitely not far off. That's a good call. Like an owned pink might have the derogatory term cuddle slave attached with them.
Right.
Definitely.
That's what I got out of it. Oh, just a more derogatory term for pink.
So page 150, the quote, Titus is impossible to like. Yeah, he fucking is. Titus is one of the most deplorable characters in fiction that I've read.
Yeah, but it's so good.
He's so bad and so good. Like he's infuriating.
Mm-hmm. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, and what if you're Primus of the winning house? Antonia asks. She twirls a finger through her golden curls. Then welcome to glory, darling. Welcome to fame and power. So I must be Primus. Like the Stark, like, yes, this is an explicit path to power. So I must take that path, which is exactly what he's there for. But it's a very kind of robotic thought process of like, I will do whatever I must do. And I will have the goal of whatever will get me there faster.
Yeah. So Darrow's goal, like you're saying, what's your perception of Darrow's goal? Like, what's the real end game post Institute for Darrow?
I think it's a little muddy right now. I think because of everything that's going on with him, he doesn't have a clear view of what that goal is, but ultimately is to not only exact revenge on the injustices done to him and his own, but also to break them free of the chains that they found themselves in.
Yeah. Okay. Definitely. My thought, I definitely agree with that. And I think that's the like larger metatextual goal. Obviously winning Primus is kind of like a milestone.
Yeah. It's a means to the end.
Yep. If you had to predict what winning Primus meant and like the next escalating step after doing that, what comes after? Like in this moment that Darrow's dreaming forward, what does he see at the end? Actual,
tangible, like societal power.
Yeah, right.
Like this is his path to a prominent place within the Gold Society where he has not only respect, but the actual ability to get things done and the actual ability to go forward and like influence what's happening with the Reds that he associates with.
Yeah. I definitely agree with you. So in terms of the society structure, do you picture him more as in like on the ground sort of general or like an admiral on a warship moving around? You know, more like Ender,
I would think something more bureaucratic.
More bureaucratic. Okay. So more like
exactly. Something where he can actually, because like somebody who controls a fleet controls that fleet, but they don't change laws. And they don't have actual influence over like the structure of the society, but somebody like an arch governor, I'm guessing probably isn't a commander, but is strictly bureaucratic.
Yeah, they explained earlier he's got a small fleet that is only rivaled. Like the only fleet that's larger is the Bologna's fleet, which is the actual Imperator.
Okay. So I guess my guess is that his goal would have less to do with the control of a fleet and more to do with the influence over the society.
Sure.
Whether that means he has to also control a fleet, I think is irrelevant to him.
Yeah.
But however that society is structured, I don't know it well enough yet.
Interesting. No, I'm down. I just wanted to drag it out of you.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know about you, but I've got two like loves in this next chapter, in chapter 21. I love the imagery of the castle on Mars, like the idea of castles on Mars and this like deep fertile crescent. The world here is just painted in such a cool way. Yeah. All the lines are standout, so it doesn't make sense to read any one of them necessarily, but like everything is just painted in this beautiful picture. And I think at this point, 150 pages in, you kind of get used to Pierce Brown's prose, and it just all feels really good.
But also there's more going on and there's more information to actually convey, so it feels more natural. Mm-hmm. It doesn't feel like empty Shakespearean prose that is rambling and flowery for nothing, but it makes sense now the way he's writing with this more densely packed set of information.
Absolutely. Something I had skipped over too was Leah's character. Leah's really interesting. The limping girl, the kind of wounded deer in a kind of literal sense that attaches to Rogue immediately is I think she's an interesting character, albeit one note, but like...
Yeah, and she doesn't get fleshed out that much beyond that either.
I mean, there are a couple of moments that she has, right? Where like Darrow kind of like verbally abuses her basically to put her into place where she figures out her shit and actually becomes a person as opposed to a leech or a parasite.
Right. Yeah, that's true.
But I forgot to mention her and I wanted to do that. I also fucking love on page 154, Fitchner's contempt for Sevro is so funny. Did anyone else hear a squat, ugly little goblin go? Well, whatever sound goblins make. Like,
and the fact that goblin it becomes almost an endearing nickname, or a nickname that not necessarily endearing, but a nickname that doesn't actually mean anything and is just his nickname.
Right. He is a lot shorter than everyone else. You know, everyone else is like mid-6, like 3 to 6'5". Titus being the monstrous exception at like 6'8" or something like that. Monstrous exception. Haha, you're 6'7". I get it. But I also love like Sevro's responses. Like, you know, he's at that point, Fitchner's telling him to drag deer, and Sevro just goes, dickwit. Like, there's so much contempt there. There's good
contempt there, but it's also like pretty realistic of like how teenagers getting dragged into the woods and yelled at and like withheld of food and just had to murder people. Like how would most teenagers react to something like that? Mm-hmm. They're not going to be just kind of happy to go along with what's happening most of the time. I don't know, make them walk a mile. They'll still fucking hate you. Like,
yeah, there's no winning there. I know earlier we had talked about the map that's on the front page. And a little bit is given away by looking at the map explicitly in terms of where some things are.
I actually thought about that.
So
while I was reading this, I'm like, I'm just going to not look at the map. Because I remember there being like unknown campsites or whatever they call it. And I'm like, I'm not going to look at it.
It'll be good in a chapter or two, and you'll appreciate that it exists once everything is kind of discovered. So, but just a reminder that the map can be useful if you get directionally lost, and it also helps.
I was lost, and I wanted to look at it, but I had the sort of foresight of I don't necessarily want to ruin anything about what might be playing out in the story.
Yeah. Totally get that. I like kind of the two towers between the rivers, and also obviously Sevro's comment. This is a slacking joke, isn't it? Our legs are as wide as a pink horse, you know, and it's just on top of everything else. It's really like if your legs are open, well, make a chastity belt to protect the soft spot, Fitchner says. And it's just like, oh, like, yeah, no, I mean, like this is war, and you made the analogy, and now I'm gonna fuck you back with it, slap you around with the dildo of a metaphor.
Like, I don't know, man. I could have given you nothing.
Mm-hmm.
You got a fucking castle.
Right.
Protect it.
Yeah, so a point that hasn't necessarily fully been discussed yet. So Olympus is interesting, right? This like floating castle in the air, propelling itself that all the proctors are at. Also, the Medbots come from. What do you think about Olympus? What do you see with Olympus in the future?
I'm intrigued by it because we haven't gotten into like magic at all yet.
Mm-hmm.
It's all been technology.
Do you think it's magic?
No. Not necessarily, but it doesn't explicitly explain what's happening in the mechanics of making this mountain float. My assumption is something very similar to the graph boots, but that's a huge scale. And to make it still look like a mountain, it's probably a pretty impressive undertaking.
Yeah, I definitely don't disagree. What I'll say is part of the interesting part of the story and part of the reason that I think this trilogy, this initial trilogy works so well is right now we're in Darrow's perspective, right? And Darrow has such limited knowledge of the society that he really doesn't get the way that everything works. And so when we get the line where he's describing Olympus, and I think it's Antonia's asks like, how does it float? Or Leah asks, how does it float? And he's like, I don't fucking have any clue. Because he's just a fucking dirty red from the other grab. Like he has no idea about any of this shit. And like either has to like make up a lie or figure out a reasonable reason why. And I think that's kind of interesting as a conceit for a character. He has to discover why. And we also have to discover why with him in a lot of circumstances. But yeah.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the path that's taking, but it did seem out of place for this technologically advanced society with something that just looks like a floating mountain out of like Avatar.
Fuck you, dude. No, sorry. I was watching The Legend of Korra. I thought you were talking about that Avatar. You're talking Avatar. Yeah, not The Last Airbender. Got it. No, we're good. All right. Anyway, moving on. So I also kind of like the advantages, like you were mentioning earlier, the castles. Like each house clearly has its own advantage. Ceres, as we're presented, has crops in defensible position, or in like a harder to defend position, but has easy access to water, as well as like the apple trees and things like that. Meanwhile, Mars has plenty of things to hunt and other defensible positions that aren't just the castle. Like they've got the 2 towers and another fort, right? So they've got like other options. That's not just a castle to like protect themselves. Yeah, we can only assume that other houses also have other options.
But no food and no fire and nothing like that. No real like actual survivable amenities. Like it doesn't matter how much you can hunt if you can't fucking cook it. Right,
which we do find out in short order. I think what's interesting is actually if the 4 defecting groups inside of Mars all agreed, like a lot of the other houses probably did, and came under, singular control, I don't think Mars would have had the same problem, because we do find out, obviously, that like Darrow and crew and Cassius and Roke and Leah very quickly find matches. Like they do find a source of fire for themselves, but they're unwilling to share it with Titus because they fear Titus just grabbing hold of it and taking the power of the match and the heat and the flame.
Yeah, it was less the fear. So my understanding of it was less the fear of Titus having control of the fire and more the fear that Titus would maintain power, period.
Yeah, right. Because in addition, he would have access to the fire and food and then strength.
Yeah. So, and I mean, that's semantics a little bit, but I think it's important to note, like to mention that, like, it's not that Darrow didn't want to share the fire with the rest of his team. It was that he wanted the power for himself and was unwilling to let someone else not even take credit, but gain the benefits of being the most powerful person on the team when fire was introduced to the entire house.
It's so good. There's so much interesting politics that goes on between some of these choices and decisions that are made, right? There's a lot of strategy that goes on in between each of these decisions, like you're mentioning with Titus and the way that they restrict access to things to try to disadvantage him. and yet he just savages his way through things, especially in the Titus's War chapter.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's getting back to the castles. I find it interesting too that as far as we're presented with the castles that we know of, they all seem to rally around their central cause as winning as a house first, versus Mars divided up into, well, I want to be Primus. And that goes back to the like House of Mars burns bright sort of theory and then burns out. You know, like House of Mars doesn't frequently win. Either they burn bright or they burn out. And I feel like it's just an extension.
Well,
of that
usually
metaphor.
both, right?
Yeah, right. Burn bright to burn out versus burning through.
Twice as bright, but half as long, whatever that metaphor is.
Yeah.
Whatever that idiom.
Idiom.
Idiom?
Yep, it's an idiom. Good call. Good work, PJ. Learning things. Just kidding.
I know what a fucking idiom is.
So I love. I think it's not only worthy of pointing out, but I love the fight that Cassius and Darrow have. It's not Cassius, it's Cassius. I've heard it over the fucking
It's
audiobook.
spelled.
It's like it is Cassius, and it's pronounced correctly. I promise. I need to break the habit.
But Cassius, the actual fucking name, is spelled that way.
I get it. The author says it a different way, and
I know
the narrator says it a different way. So I'm going with Cassius because I'm trying to say it the way that it's said in the audiobook. But Cassius and Darrow, that fight is just great. It's quick. They're quick and true friends, it feels like. And they know that they're wandering straight into a trap, but don't really care because they know that they're better. I love that conflict.
But not even not caring that they're running in. I mean, that's part of it, but I've done dumber things to feed my family. I did dumber things when someone I love died. Cassius is owed the company as he races down the steep hillside. Like, he understands that this is a man acting in grief and despair and he's acting reckless out of that sort of rut.
Totally.
And knows exactly what it feels like to be in that exact rut, and knows that he would have appreciated somebody to go along with him, even if it is fucking stupid. Like that. This is a real show of compassion out of him that I think gets glossed over a little bit.
That's actually a really, really good call out. Not something that I like. It's definitely Darrow showing compassion for Cassius. And like I said, they're quick friends. And not only was he kind of like wanting to be Cassius's friend, but like awkward at first and like just didn't know how to do it properly. It's not like he wouldn't have been, but now he's in this uncomfortable situation where he's also killed his brother and has to keep that to himself. You know, like it's uncomfortable because in a different circumstance, they would have been friends regardless. And there would have been none of this pressure. And like, he totally, like Darrow would have done this without hesitating, and he doesn't hesitate here.
Do you think he would have done it if he hadn't killed his brother?
Yeah, I think so. I think because there is like a bond formed before this point. It's just,
I think so too. I think this was strictly out of compassion for what Cassius was going through, not necessarily the fact that he's the one that kind of put him there.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like there's an awkward backwards tension, which would almost push him away from wanting to do this. But instead, Darrow's character doubles down on it. Like Darrow's heart doubles down on like, no, I need to be here for my friend.
Right.
Because he also knows that it was his fault. It wasn't his choice, but it was his fault.
Fault's a tough one. Fault's a tough technical word.
Well, yeah. He didn't have an option, right? It was survival.
It's by his hand.
Right. That's better.
By his hand, but at the fault of the system.
Right. Society. The board. So Darrow gets a sling blade as a weapon, huh?
Not a sling blade.
Well, kind of. It's a Reaper's Crescent.
It's close. It's almost the same thing, but it's got a different name. And that comes important later.
Yeah, right. So I also love the line inside of this fight as well, which is, it's all beautifully written and it's hard to like tear anything out, but I love this little bit. He is grace and finesse. I am rage and momentum. There are so many moments, especially in the combat, that are shiver inducing. Like I reread that and I got goosebumps. They're just goose flesh inducing moments in this, which is part of the reason that I love it.
Yeah, this combat, especially combat and inner monologue, or whatever you want to call it. It's not quite third person inner monologue, I guess.
Yeah. Because this is first person perspective, but he kind of like monologues as though he's talking to other people or imagining their circumstances from his perspective.
I don't know about that, because it's not like I do this. It's Darrow does this and is feeling this and is looking at it this way. So just omniscient third person, but really cleanly done.
Yeah, I mean it's all first person, but it's also written in such a good way of like bearing the eye, like you're saying.
Oh, it is third person, isn't it?
It's first.
Never mind.
It's first person.
It is first person.
Yeah, it is all first person. But he does such a good job.
I don't know why I was thinking it was third.
Yeah, well, exactly. He does such a good job of hiding first person. Like Chuck Palahniuk is a first person writer. I don't know that he's written a third person book. I haven't read one, or even a short story that's third person. Yeah, so like Chuck Palahniuk is a very important first person writer in terms of the space and everything else. He's done a lot too, outside of fiction, outside of sci-fi and fantasy, which a lot of the times is written, especially fantasy, is written in first person.
So then the contrast, I guess, would be like Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, which are high fantasy third person.
Right. What I'm getting to though is that like what this does is Pierce Brown is so good at submerging you in the perspective that there are moments that feel like they're third person limited. But in reality,
like thinking about the scene, I genuinely thought like, oh, those descriptions, I would write them as a third person character. So I just assumed like, oh yeah, that's third person. Fucking idiot.
Right.
All right.
I definitely agree. But yeah, so
well, yep. I know you agree.
So Darrow gets it. Yeah, you are a fucking idiot. How Ceres shows up and her banter with Fitchner. Is it Ceres? Fuck, did I say that? No, it is Ceres. Fuck.
Yeah, motherfucker. What the fuck?
Proctor Series. I didn't think so. My bad. That was a pre-show thing. Anyway.
Oh, was that pre-show?
It was pre-show.
Right.
It's fine.
Well, he and I fought about.
I thought it was.
I don't know.
I thought it was Mercury for some reason. Anyway, how Ceres shows up and her banter with Fitchner is like a flirtatious "fuck you" and "I'll fuck you later" too kind of thing. Like it's
a "fuck you, please."
And it seems like a lot of the other house proctors are doing kind of similar things. And by things, I don't mean like the "fuck you" kind of thing, like playing tricks on the houses during the orientation. They talk about Mercury with the rats for Jupiter, Diana tattling, a giant fucking phallic cake that Fitchner sent to someone. With
what was in it? Woodpeckers? Yeah, woodpeckers. A whole bunch of woodpeckers inside of it.
Yeah, to like tear holes in the castle. Like
and the noise.
Yeah, and the noise. It's just there's so much that's interesting and funny. And it also this moment, this section, these last two sections remove us from the society of the red and rub it in our face in a way. You know, the severity of life as red is like life or death in every single moment. And now we've been submerged in like jokes and games and debauchery that the Golds play. And I think that comparison is fascinating, especially here.
It is, definitely. It's prevalent.
Mm-hmm.
But if this is the source of it, I guess that makes sense.
The source of the debauchery?
This.
You're saying like the Institute.
Yeah. If that's what kind of instills in them the sport of fucking with one another while also being ruthless, I guess it makes sense that would be really instilled in them.
Yeah, I think so. I think there are a lot of other things also. Like there's the
I'm sure
over prolific aspect of even talking about the city that they went to and like Cassius's initial invitation to Aegea with, you know, saying like, we'll go to strip clubs. It'll be really cool. I'll pay for you. Don't worry about it. Whatever else. I think that it all is that way. And I think it happens before, but it doesn't end at adulthood.
Okay, gotcha.
So Ceres shows up and they're also like planning an ambush, and Titus just fucking knocks over a horse. Just like shoulders a horse.
That's not the only time that happens. Doesn't Pax do that later also?
Yeah, Pax is a beast more of a man than Titus is, which is terrifying for the record. But
Pax does that while Darrow is on top of the horse. Pax just like fucking nose tackles
Pax out Telemanus.
The horse.
Yeah.
It's a horse.
It's huge.
Those things are huge, man.
And the amount of like yeah.
Yeah, that's a big dude. but Titus doing the same thing. Like, he's a big dude.
Right. Just like here, it's almost, it's shocking in that way. Like, I couldn't imagine. My parents in Texas own horses. And so I've seen and cleaned and like helped with the horses, but there's no fucking way I'd try to shoulder one of those things.
No.
I'd die. Like, no way.
You would absolutely.
No way.
You'd die quickly.
I would die quick.
You
would die
probably put up a little bit of a fight,
No.
but it'd be pretty quick.
It and fast. Yeah. Like, no way. No way you shoulder a fucking horse. Like, ugh.
That said, this passage and this like scene made me really excited about the idea of like another fucking beast at Darrow's side. It didn't work out that way, but I was excited to see like, oh, this guy's gonna brutalize some people,
Like run through
and
the
like
wall.
Darrow's gonna use him like a tool really effectively. And I was excited to see how that happened, and half of that was true.
Yeah, he definitely brutalizes people, but Darrow has zero control over him. You're right. It's a good call. I also find it interesting inside of this passage. We see kind of the way that Golds play, right? Like Cassius laughs after Titus pisses himself, right? We're kind of given this perspective that laughter, that laughing at him will reap consequences in the long run. And it definitely does in a mirror that's way worse for Cassius.
I didn't even make that connection until right now.
Yeah. I didn't on my initial and subsequent read through. My second read through I did on my third. So if it makes you feel better.
Fair enough.
But it does play into that whole like gold society is such about the microaggressions to some degree. Like all of it matters. So that also makes us as readers, I think, looking at this now, understanding the way that can complicate things later is like, I need to pay attention to fucking everything because anything could come up and be a reason that someone would kill someone else. I also love the immediate comparison to the Hunger Games on page 161. It's almost counter-textual in a way. So what would be the point, Fitchner talking, what would be the point if we now had the fittest just murder each other till there were only a few left? We want you to show us your brilliance like Alexander, like Caesar, Napoleon, and Merrywater. We want you to manage an army, distribute justice, arrange for provisions of food and armor. Only a fool can stick a blade into another's belly. Any fool, sorry, not only. The school's role is to find the leaders of men, not the killers of men. And that's in response to Titus being a dick, basically. No shock.
Yeah, well, yeah.
I mean, like Titus is like, I could murder everyone. Murder them.
So the point, you silly children, is not to kill, but to conquer. And how do you conquer in a game where there are 11 enemy tribes? Take them out one at a time. Titus answers knowingly, no, ogre. Like,
anybody besides ogre have a guess? I do like the nicknaming of Titus as ogre. Yeah, it's some goblin, ogre, reaper. It's kind of
I've really been liking the use of the name Reaper for Darrow. It's fitting. Like it's fitting. It's kind of ominous and foreshadowing, I guess.
Yeah, no, definitely. It definitely foreshadows to some degree. And I think part of the reason that he can lean into it is because he likes using the sling blade. You know, it's sort of his tool of choice right now. It's a reaping scythe, but it's a sling blade. Effectively, it's a question mark of a sword, as they call it in the text. So 162, we're also introduced to the concept of how a house wins. Isn't killing, it's conquering. It's creating slaves with their standard, which is so good. That's such a good concept. Like, yep, we take you, we stick our flag on your head, and you have to obey us, or else society is going to deem you as inferior for the rest of your lives if you don't listen to what we say.
Right.
It's so good. Especially when that girl gets run over by horses later when she's a slave. That's a great scene. No, I'm just saying, like, the whole thing stretches to a point with Titus. Titus abuses the system. So Sevro / Goblin dragging in a wolf after he made a joke earlier about, we could just eat the wolves is certainly something. And he pulls nails as weapons. And what do you think about Sevro as a whole, huh?
I love him.
Yeah, I thought you would. I was like, Sevro's going to be PJ's favorite fucking character in this book.
He is my favorite character. by far. Like, it's not even close. It's not even like he is the fourth faction.
Yeah,
and they refer to him as such multiple times.
Yep. And when he shows up later, just himself,
Did you think I was just waiting in the bushes? Well, yes, actually.
Yeah, that's one of the funniest moments of these sections when like Cassius and Darrow were reflecting on it. And they're like, "Yeah, we thought we were just jerking. You were just jerking off in the bushes, like not doing anything." And he's like, "I fucking mapped out everything, you assholes. Like I did a shit ton of work."
Like he's seriously, as far as from the point where he finished reading backwards, he's the most important character of Mars House.
Oh yeah. From where we're at reading backwards for sure. Him and Titus we would, in theory.
I guess Titus is a good,
because Titus dominated the house, right? And almost did.
Yeah, for different reasons. For different reasons, they're the most important. The most important to the story, but most important to the action, I think, is Goblin. That said, the action exists because of the tyranny of Titus.
Yep. And really now we hit the tribes, we hit the section. What's interesting, and we can talk about this kind of generally too. So we do have kind of we've got the Cassius, brain melt, Cassius, Darrow, Roke, Leah, and eventually Quinn, and Pebble, Clown, Weed, Thistle that become like the low drafts underneath them that are one tribe. We've got Titus with Poxus and Nexus, right? Pollux and Vexus.
Vexus, yeah.
I just remapped a couple of Hearthstone cards onto characters in this book, which is not correct. Pollux and Vexus, yeah. A Titus Goon trademark.
You did put a trademark in there. I did
put a trademark in the notes.
Another Titus Goon.
Yeah, trademark.
TN.
Antonia's house. Antonia's part of the house, right? We don't actually interact with Antonia's part of the house almost at all. Antonia is kind of on her own.
And there are times when she seems to be like in the same kind of deal as Titus. Like they interact and are friendly with each other pretty regularly.
Yeah,
especially during battles.
They're not with each other, but they're not against each other so much as like Cassius and Darrow are against Titus. And Sevro, in a similar way, doesn't really have any allegiances. We later figure he's aligned more with Darrow and Cassius. But similarly, it's kind of like 2v2 in a way.
It seems more like Sevro is the lone wolf. He'll be the lone wolf, and he will fight for the house in whatever way he thinks the house is most well equipped, I guess. Whatever makes for the best,
most likely victory.
Strength going forward. Yeah. That's the right way to put it.
I totally agree. So, I also really love Sevro's line about Antonia. Sevro says, "I wouldn't want Antonia to lead. She's a bitch." And then Antonia shrugs in agreement. She's just like, "Yeah, you know what? You're right. I am a bitch." Like, just
you know what? Yeah. There's something to that. There's really something to that in leadership.
I also think Antonia being able to admit that is an interesting thing for her character, right? Like there are in fiction, I think it's a poorly worn trope at this point, but ice queens exist, right? I don't think Antonia is an ice queen.
But I think she rides that
she rides that line, but she's also self-aware of it in the same way.
And I think that's what's more important. I think that's what makes it more cold.
Right. Is that she knows exactly what she's doing. She's a calculating ice queen, intentionally pushing things the way that she wants to.
Right.
Totally. I agree.
I think that's even colder, don't you?
Oh yeah, 100%. I think it does lean into the character archetype even more, but it also defies it in the way that most ice queens are like, well, you didn't get my coffee or whatever, and so I'm firing you. You know, I think to like Devil Wears Prada, and not Anne Hathaway's character, but the other character that gets fired from the movie. Great flick, by the way. Highly recommend rewatching.
I don't think I've ever seen that movie.
Really, it's really great for characters. Would recommend at this point.
I've listened to the band. I don't know. I've listened to them.
That's fair.
I didn't say I listened to them that often. I've listened to them more than I've watched the movie after the same name.
Fair. I love Titus's sort of exploits over like a page and a half, where it's really just like explanation almost. Actually, we're not quite there yet, but everyone dislikes Titus, obviously. Like, no one likes him and his brutes. You know, like, for instance, on 169, Antonia manages to send groups armed with shovels and axes found in the castle to garrison in Deimos and Phobos their towers. The girl may be a spoiled witch, but at least she's not stupid. Then Titus's pack steals their axes as they sleep, and I revise my opinion.
Yeah.
And this is kind of like a page and a half that reads like third person, but it's like first person journal entry from Darrow almost. And it condenses time in a way that makes it feel like third person in the way that you were talking about earlier.
All right. Hear me out. Getting into the segment of what would a film adaptation be. Mm-hmm. You just mentioned kind of following Darrow in a first person / third person kind of deal. What if this entire series is done as a mockumentary?
Of what?
I mean, I don't like that. Not mocking. Okay, mockumentary, I guess, is probably the wrong term.
You're thinking like Office,
but in the style of an actual like camera crew following what's happening with a little bit of fourth wall breaking.
So more like where the shadows, where the blah blah blah.
What they do in the shadows. What they do in
the shadows. Thank you. Yep.
Yep. So that sort of style. Obviously, it would take away a lot. You'd have to do something kind of
and there's
comedic
so much
about it.
It would make it almost too comedic. You know, the way that I think about that when you mention that is I think to Starship Troopers in the way that it's kind of intentionally campy and then breaks away from the perspective.
It is.
Which
You're right.
Can be good, I think, in the context of like Starship Troopers, but I think it would undersell the importance that the rest of this literature brings.
I think you're right. I think that'd be a fun way to do it, though. If you were to do like a small chunk of it,
of course, it could,
and not do the entire series.
It could be really interesting to do like an episode selling the Institute. You know, like you definitely could do an episode mockumentary style in the Institute, like following around different houses and like watching people just get brutally murdered for different reasons, or like the phallic cake and the hummingbird opening up, the hummingbirds flying out, and then you jump to the razor blade bread. Or like the razor blade bread. I've got to know,
dude. That was fucking brutal.
Yeah, right. Like the starving people get razor blade bread thrown at them, like and they eat it, and then oh god, they're screaming for like 3 days or something like that. The screams finally die down. It's just
like I just imagine Darrow sitting around a fire with a little like piece of what were they called? The not deer. The small prancy deer that they have, the scrawny deer. I don't remember either.
We'll call it a deer. Anyway, I really like the initial character building on Quinn. I appreciate it. She killed the deer with a trap and then told the story about how she killed the thing with her teeth. She even showed us evidence, hair between her teeth and gums along the bite marks of the deer. We thought we had a prettier Sevro on our hands till she laughed too hard to go on with the tall tale. Cassius helped her get the deer hair out of her mouth. Wow, I can't talk. I like a committed liar. It's on page 171. Man, yeah, I brutalized that quote. But all things considered, Quinn is funny and clever and interesting.
She is. And also brutal, but not like that brutal, and not taking herself too seriously. Like she seems to understand most everything about what's going on in the society, if that tracks.
Yeah, no, I definitely think
society might be the wrong with this.
She gets the Institute.
Community. She understands the Institute.
Right.
Yeah.
I think we get a couple of pages of kind of the Titus violence and other things that are going on with friends. You know, they get pimples again because they can't bathe, and Golds aren't used to this. Darrow like kind of brushes it off. It doesn't really matter. There's some like interstitial things that happen between the community that's interesting, that brings some of the Golds down in terms of characters. But we really get our first next dose of action with the Medbots coming down and being introduced from Olympus, because like Fitchner said, they don't want the kids to die. They just want the weak to be cleaned without killing them at this point, because they already killed 50% of the people that are here.
Yeah, they're beyond the culling.
Yeah. So dozens of blinking Medbots pour from Olympus's castle. We hear their distant whine. Proctors flicker after them like flaming arrows towards the distant southern mountains. Whatever has happened, one thing is certain. Chaos reigns in the south. What are your thoughts of what the fuck is going on in the South? We never get this answer. What's going on down there?
I would guess something probably pretty similar to what goes on in the North or middle, wherever they are.
Later, we get introduced to a character called the Jackal. How do you think he plays into that?
So, okay, we barely get introduced to that, but
barely. It's like 2 lines.
I'd like to tackle that after this. How many houses are there? 12? There are 12 houses. I feel like the impression is these 2 houses are kind of the farthest north.
Ceres and Mars.
Yeah. So the other 10 houses are all to the south, presumably a little bit closer together to one another. So with you've played Age of Empires, you've played Warcraft 3. Like if you're closer to another civilization, another enemy, you're gonna clash a little bit faster. So I think it makes sense that like these 2 more isolated houses kind of hear all the action happening in the background before they've really had the necessity to defend or the opportunity to attack. That was my sort of read on this situation. I have no idea geographically where they are, but the fact that they only heard activity to the south told me that they were farther north.
Well, and there were fires. Like they can see the fires in the south. So something bad, comparatively, like there are definitely like things that go bad north here as we explore the rest of this chapter, but it's not as bad as whatever is going on in the south. Very clearly something is bad down there.
Right. That's true.
I just said bad 3 times in a row. Needed to cleanse my mouth.
To be
terrible, horrible. All right, we're good.
Bad. Also, I feel like talking directly into my microphone makes me sound like I'm cutting in
directly
this audio and like re-recording things. It's not the case. My microphone's gain is pretty low, but it's a very sensitive microphone. So getting really close dramatically changes how it sounds. Anyway, where was I at? I don't fucking remember.
Friendo, we were talking about the Medbots in the South. So
thank you, Goodman.
Yep. Friendo is not low speak, mid speak, or high speak. That's trash speak.
No, it's just Crossland speak. Yeah. We do call each other Friendo all the time.
Continue, my friend. Goodman, my Goodman.
I don't know, man.
Do you think house is dominating them all, or are they all in fighting?
No, I think they're all. I think they had a short-lived skirmish like Darrow had with Cassius, and like it was very kind of feel out what's going on, and then let's go to our castles and actually like turtle up for a bit.
Yeah, true.
Play the macro game.
Funny. That's an RTS strategy, which means to sit in your base and wait for other people to come to you. If you've ever played Risk, it's the Australia strategy, where you just pile everyone on the islands in the way.
Yeah,
that's turtling.
Not only waiting for everybody to like come to you.
Sounds like you're using an excuse to defend the tactic, but go ahead.
Well, no, I'm describing the tactic. I'm going into detail of what happened. Like you're not just sitting there like, oh yeah, like let's see what happens when they come here. You're actively like building troops and building an army in a strictly defensive position. Mm-hmm. So you essentially max out your army because there's a limited number of like I'm thinking StarCraft.
And to some degree, like obviously, like everyone's at 50. Yeah, but everyone only has 50 people. Everyone only has 50 people. But like Ceres, for instance, has everything inside of their castle for the most part, outside of crops and some trees that they're protecting. But they have enough inside to survive if everything goes on bad outside.
But not only just waiting, but actively preparing and building up defenses for the incoming eventual attack, whenever that might be. That's what I've never had to describe turtling before. It sounds so dumb.
Yeah. You're right.
But that's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking they're feeling things out initially with fires and I don't know, mock warfare essentially.
All right.
And then they're all going to retreat. They know what their enemies are at least unpreparedly capable of and prepare for that.
Right. I'm going to give you a little nudge on this next question that I have. So as I'd mentioned earlier, Cassius and Darrow's tribe is made up of a lot of named no drafts or low drafts that were funny earlier. Pebble, Weed, Thistle, Screwface, and Clown, for instance. We also gained Leah, Quinn, and Roke. Roke, of course, was kind of on earlier, and they internally challenge each other to toughen them up. If any of the characters present, who do you think dies?
Screwface, Weed, Thistle. Simply because we haven't heard anything from them yet.
Okay. Pebble and Clown are fine, though.
What?
Pebble and Clown are fine, though?
Well, I just didn't remember their names.
So you think those
like,
5
all of them
could die?
And I think those 5 will die, and I won't care because I don't know about them. And this is me not reading into military strategy, but reading into the way this book is written and how the characters that are important are introduced early and slowly fleshed out. And those characters were introduced by name only from Fitchner. Fitchner, right?
No, he's actually, the one that, so Cassius whoever jokingly named them. He was like, you are this, you are this, you are this, you are this at a dinner table.
Whoever going down the line of the dinner table. I was thinking it was like at the head of the table, but it was kind of at the head of the table as Cassius.
Yeah, thinking like Harry Potter
with Darrow.
Tables, but yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's what it looks like, right?
Yeah, so they were kind of in the middle of the table, and Cassius was pointing at the end of the table and named all those people at the end of the table, the low drafts, effectively, those names. So
those names are mentioned, and then we get nothing, and then we get them mentioned by name again as a fact that they're there.
You're thinking they're just disposable bodies?
Yes, okay. Absolutely. Yeah. I'm thinking they're disposable bodies.
I don't want to spoil anything, but you've got an interesting perspective on it. So I dig. Yep. The thing I'd say is on 178, I fucking died and laughed so hard because we've had almost 20 pages without Sevro to some degree. We've got a decent amount of time separated. Yeah. And I fucking love the description of Sevro on this page. Like we'd mentioned before, he's the 4th house that goes unmentioned when they talk about the 4 houses, being Antonio, Titus, Darrow, Cassius, Sevro. It's Sevro, and I'm nearly certain he's the only member in that tribe, unless he's adopted wolves by now. It is hard to say if he has or hasn't. Our house does not have family dinner, though occasionally we'll see him running along the hillsides at night in his wolfskin, looking, as Cassius put it best, like some sort of hairy demon child on hallucinogens. And wow. It's so good. Like, you just imagine like a guy stalking around with a wolf skin over his head with like a knife and like with the shadow light. Like, that's exactly how I think of Sevro based on that description.
Continuing off of that. And once Roke even heard something, not a wolf, howling in the shrouded highlands. Some days, Sevro walks around all normalish, insulting everything that moves, except for Quinn. He makes an exception for her, delivering meats and edible mushrooms instead of insults. I think he's sweet on her, even though she's sweet on Cassius.
Yeah, that's true. That also gives a layer to him.
It gives a layer to him, but also the Roke even heard something, not a wolf, howling in the shrouded highlands.
Yeah.
Which is, I didn't realize, foreshadowing.
Mm-hmm. It ends up being foreshadowing.
It should have been. I should have realized it because of how fucking over the head it is.
Mm-hmm. It's very clear in post.
Yeah. I remember being confused by that statement the first time I read through it. Like, what the fuck is he talking? All right, whatever. Sevro, I read it as Servo because Tom Servo and MST3K. And I didn't actually realize it was Sevro until this recording. I genuinely thought it was Servo. I didn't make the connection that it feels so very dumb to not realize that howling in the distance was explicitly talking about the person that they were talking about on either side of that sentence.
Right. Yeah, it's like, oh yeah, no, that probably is Sevro, huh? It could have been anyone, but it is Sevro, right? I definitely agree. I love all of Sevro's like minor contributions to this chapter just build to his like almost glorious reintroduction. It's so good. Anyway, so part of me thinks that like Roke is right on 171. Would it take more than fire and food to convince most of Titus' followers to like jump ship? Also, we passed the line. It's at the top of 179. I I think he's wanking
Yeah, you
off.
keep saying 171. You keep saying 171.
I've actually been saying 170 wine, which isn't better. It's okay. I think he's wanking off in the bushes, just waiting for us to all kill each other. And that's another thing. And it's also foreshadowing to the later comment of, did you think I was wanking off in the bushes? And Cassius is like, yeah, I did.
Actually, yes.
I actually said that a couple of pages ago. I think Roke's right, though. Like, talking about the fire and being like, I actually genuinely, in this reread, was swayed to Roke's opinion, being like, you could probably win over most of Titus's followers just with the ability to feed them. You wouldn't win over Titus and like some of the closest, like his closest people, such as Pollux and Vexus and whatnot. But you could win over pretty much everyone else.
Yeah.
I don't know. This read around specifically, I was more on Roke's side. I felt like it would have been the right move to pull him in at this point.
No, you're right. You're totally right. I think it's the right move, but also I think it's a little bit naive because of, yes, they'd be swayed by it ignores the
it ignores like Titus's like dominance.
Not only Titus, but everybody else. Like, you need somebody to actively break rank, before everybody else follows, which is like
did like Leah, Thistle, Pebble, etc.
Oh, but a little bit.
It's not quite the same.
It's not the same. So you need someone to break rank before like everybody else follows suit, and that's a tough thing to like expect someone to do, especially like right away.
Yeah, it's tough. I generally like. So if I were to find myself in a character, I find myself very closely in line with Roke in a lot of ways. No shock. I think...
Is it weird that I find myself with Titus?
Yeah, dude. It's bad. Like, say Pax instead.
I don't like him.
Yeah, but say Pax instead.
I guess Pax is...
Just assume he's the big...
Pax is less of a prevalent character, so I don't like think of him as a character.
He's just like shouting his name a lot, dude. Like...
Yeah, I don't do that, but I guess, yeah. Yeah, Pax is probably the right
He's
call.
the unsubtle flex of people.
I'm pretty subtle. I feel
sometimes. No, I definitely agree with you. I just think I relate with Roke in a way that is to say, like, I would rather appeal to people's humanity as opposed to assume that they're on the opposite side of the spectrum, that they think that everyone has the worst intention. And it's proven time and time again that Roke is wrong in that way. But I still think I would try Roke's path before going Darrow's path. Might be a weakness, definitely a difference in character, but I generally speaking. But so Titus and his goons, trademark, remind me so much in the pages on like 180 and 181 as they're kind of lurking around the edges of Titus and interacting, Vexus and Pollux remind me of Ursula's eels from The Little Mermaid. You know, kind of like swimming around her and like commenting on things and being like, "Yeah, see, yeah." Like, it's so similar to me. I couldn't distance myself.
Yeah, I'm with you
from that. They're reiterating what he's saying and whispering all the awful things they're thinking on their own as well. But I'm really glad in the end that Darrow knocks the shit out of Vexus. Like, it just feels good.
Feels great.
So passing through that section about the map and everything else, like punching him and then running out, we hit chapter 24, Titus's War, which is a very tight, cruel chapter where Titus goes to war basically with House Ceres, claiming horses, apple trees, slaves out of the people of Ceres and the like. There's like a 3-page long passage basically that does an excellent job of portraying the sort of brutality that this man exerts, kind of like a blunt weapon. He's just exceptionally cruel. I find the scene, especially with the final raid of the Archer woman on 185, to be just a sort of brutal rendition of him throwing that lasso around her neck as she peeks out, dragging her out from everyone else and dragging her all the way back. Like, just horrendous.
It was interesting seeing like the hunting side of things being included in that passage, because it means that they have to like figure out if they have a more extended foraging and camping trip I guess. They've got to figure out hunting and eating and camping within that themselves, which is even more close quarters, but I guess less important because it never comes up so far.
Any other thoughts on like Titus's war in the immediate sense? Like the fire that he's running away with, trying to capture and failing. There's no strategy to Titus. There's nothing that equates him as smarter. He's just a blunt instrument to some degree, you know?
God, it's he exhibits such great war strategy, but the real like quick thinking decision making doesn't translate. And I'm trying to think about like what I thought about Titus before finishing this chapter or finishing this section. And it's like, I'm only thinking about it through that lens, and it's hard.
No, I also think it's important to evaluate it through that lens, though, right? Like, part of the reason that Titus makes all of these decisions, it's revealed at the very end, is because he is a red. And he does view this whole thing as like a raping of his society. So he doesn't feel bad about any of the decisions that he's making because he feels like it's justified. It's
no, and it's not only that he doesn't feel bad. This is exactly what he came for.
He is
like Titus is what Darrow initially wanted to be.
An instrument of rage.
Darrow has now the luxury of understanding the importance of patience and getting through these early phases in order to wield more power and therefore take down even more at once.
I definitely agree with you.
So like it's Titus is Darrow without foresight.
Definitely. Without the like cognitive understanding and the strategy, he's just like the blunt instrument that made it through because of his muscles and everything else, which I think we can definitely talk about at the end a little bit more and lean into it. I think there are a couple of things that are interesting inside of this chunk. Like we'd mentioned earlier, Titus's men raiding House Ares, like grabbing the torch. Another raid, they have bread thrown at them as like it seems to be a surrender. Titus's men end up eating razor blades in the bread, and just it's eek, it's badness, it's terrible. And as we mentioned before, the archer girl is made into a slave, seemingly raped. Another woman cries out rape from the fields. The people inside of Ceres feel so much vindication that they run out over the fields and trample her to death. And it's just, that is one of the most cruel things fucking brutal. In the fucking book so far.
That gets overlooked later on when Darrow confronts Titus talking about killing people. He never mentions her.
Well, we don't know that she's dead, and that's also something I put in the notes, that she does get carried away by the Medbots, and they never see her
so
again.
It doesn't say she gets trampled to death. It just says she gets trampled, doesn't it?
It would be so insane to assume that she doesn't get trampled to death. Like she was not. There's no guarantee. Like Darrow didn't see her die. She didn't see the pulse. He didn't see the pulse fade. So Titus can claim something against him. It's like, well, that didn't happen, and that's kind of the way that Gold Society works. Is like if we don't see it with our eyes, it doesn't count at this point. Like that's like Gold Society appears. So I think there's an element of that involved with her specifically.
Well, but beyond that, if you go later on in the segment, he's talking to Titus and says that like something's mentioned about him having not killed anybody directly.
Killed anyone else. Right. He's tried, but the Medbots are too fast.
Right. So they don't mention her. It doesn't explicitly talk about her, but it also doesn't explicitly talk about her in either direction. So are we then, because of that statement, to assume that she survived the trampling?
Maybe. So
or is the lesson that the fact that he just kind of laid her there and then somebody else came out and trampled her means that he's completely innocent of any sort of harm that came to her?
No, I don't think that he's innocent. I also don't think everyone else thinks that he's innocent.
Right. It's more of like, how should I be approaching this? It's really confusing.
Yeah, so I think the perspective is that the Medbots intervene, obviously, when someone's in a fatal or near fatal or dangerous condition, right? Which is why the flooding of the South, I think, is very interesting, because there so many Medbots head south, but they do swarm out consistently after every Titus raid, right? Like the whine of the Medbots is consistent through the section, but the whine of the Medbots is at its worst when this woman is getting trampled. I think she either lives or dies. I think it's ominous in that kind of way. It's either, but the question remains, or the sort of thought remains, that like Titus is so brutal that we actually don't know whether she lived or died, and she's going to either live or die in hospital custody. We'll never know the answer. I really like the end of this chapter as well, after Titus's war is described from this third person perspective for the most part, as it ends with, and so as those of any tyrant after a failed war, his eyes turn inward. And it's just so, it's shiver inducing, because now he's right after this, he goes on, he's raping slaves and the women of the house. He captures
that
Cassius.
gets blamed on everyone else.
Blamed on everyone else. He captures Cassius and lays his trap. He, fucking tears Quinn's ear off. And fucking Titus has a problem with taking people's ears off. That's a thing through Titus's.
Yeah, that's tough.
Like, what the fuck, dude?
A tough thing to live by.
This exchange between the trio that I found in 195 was wonderful. At least it didn't cost you your life. Just my pride, Cassius says. Good. It's something you have in abundance from Rook. And it's good. Worst case, would the pissing on you cause? Like nothing really, no real damage. Like you didn't have any of this other shit.
No real damage right now in this conversation, but that's talked about later on, isn't it?
Yeah.
No, but like the last couple pages, Sevro maybe, or somebody else, they're like, they pissed on him, man. Like, we can't hang up his picture. So even though it seems like a pretty innocent joke,
it's a combo.
It actually has a like realistic
consequence to the action. Right.
Yeah.
Totally agree. It hits deep. It hits hard. It's tough.
Right.
Definitely agree. So chapter 26, we enter on page 195, is very interesting, titled Mustang. Mustang obviously being horse related. We very quickly learn that Mustang is the name of Mustang is obviously the fastest horse that at the time they were aware of. And as such, the nickname of the hot woman that Darrow has seen multiple times is Mustang, as we catch. She does actually get named in this section as well, but it's very brief. She's interesting. Mustang's very interesting. She's one of the highest draft picks picked before Darrow was. And we know that Darrow was picked in the first round. What does Mustang kind of gain out of their interaction? What does she get out of that with Darrow?
I mean, truly, I would think it would get almost nothing, right? Like, they took advantage of something that already existed. Why not also take advantage of it?
Right. So if there are 12 houses and they all have traits, and we assume that most of the other golds kind of have like some inkling from their parents or some other impression, it becomes more interesting, right? Like, it becomes more interesting when you understand that some of the golds in society maybe have an impression that they can pass down to their kids. So Mustang here has an impression of House Mars being basically the place for burnouts or victors. And she assumes, with the way that shit's going, because she knows it's going on with Titus, that they're fucking burnouts.
No, that's a fair assumption at that point.
What's very interesting is obviously they have like a very flirty exchange where they're looking to like tackle the horse and everything else between the two of them. Cassius is also flirting, saying she's very beautiful, but he's obviously been brutalized the day before by Titus. And Mustang also refers to him as Reaper with the scythe, which is interesting because obviously Sunblade scythe. Nothing's been really like alluded to. She's the first one to call him Reaper directly, isn't she? No, Fitchner, I think, was. Fitchner said,
yeah, I think you're right.
You look like a fucking Grim Reaper or something like that. Yeah, so it kind of becomes a thing, right? And so they talk about Mercury, they talk about a number of the other houses that might have been higher. And in the post of the exchange, after they finally tackle and try to steal the horse, instead she looks like she's going to kiss him, making a kissy face. Instead, she whistles, and the whole plan becomes a bit more complicated. I hear hooves. Everyone has a bloody damn horse but us. On page 199. It's like Mars just got fucked on their total outlook of their house. What'd they get? They got castles and 2 towers. Everyone else got horses and food and shit, but Mars has to fend for themselves.
If that.
Right. Something I found very interesting is in post, they come up with a plan, right? After like this conflict goes on and they leave and they dive in. But the plan seems to be to force conflict, and this is all part of the plan to contact Mustang and Antonia and everything else. This is maybe the most convoluted part of this entire section, but it's also like it's hinted at well enough. I don't know. That was my impression of that. But like the whole plan with Cassius and everyone else is very interesting because obviously they're only anticipating so many variables. And then fucking Sevro, the monster wolf man, shows up to save the day when they're in the middle of the pond, surrounded by Minervans, taking people down with his twin knives, just being a fucking.
And he describes it as like I see a black wolf on the edge of the pond, and it ends up just being not Sevro wearing the pelt of a black wolf from head to toe.
Yeah.
Which I felt like was great visualization. He's one of my favorite characters.
There's just so much good. There's so much good like imagery here. Unlike 201, right? So in terms of what we're talking about, fear trickles down my spine. Something howls. It is not a wolf. It can't be what I think it is. Blue light flashes as a stunned pike flails in the air. The boy screams another curse. A knife got him. Someone runs to his aid and electricity flares blue again. I see a black wolf standing over one body as another falls. Darkness again. Silence, then the mournful whine of Medbots descending from Olympus. I hear a familiar voice.
So what is it that she thinks it is?
Mustang had already left at this point. Yeah, she had left because she had decided to lay siege on the rest of the house.
Okay, gotcha. Either way, she's going to need more RAM, probably.
More RAM?
I don't know why I said that.
Are you down?
Maybe a little bit.
So obviously they had like this whole plan going into the engagement with Titus because they had to take Titus down somehow. How did they do it? They engage another house. They create a backup plan where Ceres potentially intervenes, giving Minerva standard Ceres as kind of a defense just in case, or like offering it, basically like being ready to offer it. What's fascinating here is that neither Darrow nor Cassius assumed that they would have their own standard, and yet fucking Sevro, the fucking boy, comes out of this story as they're wandering out of the lake, freezing their dicks off after they assumed he was just wanking in the fucking bushes. So I stole the standard from the keep and buried it in the woods. You just stole it. Just like that. Crazy little sod. You're prime mad. 100th pick and you're prime mad. Page 202. And it's just, it's so good because Sevro is fucking insane. on page 203 is our like quote that we keep talking about all the time, which is the wanking off in the bushes. What do you think I've been doing this whole time? Waking off in the bushes? Kind of. Yeah, actually. It's just we've talked about it a couple of times, but it's just important to reference as we pass it.
Yes, exactly that.
It's so good. As a moment between the three of them, it's just a great bonding moment. Isn't it kind of ironic to some degree that Minervans, which, you know, for those who don't know, Minerva is the direct Roman successor to Athena. So Athenians and Athens get overrun in the fashion that they do on 204. Like, I find it very funny that House Mars, House Ares, the people who are the closest to Spartans in the degree that's talked about by Fitchner and everything else, are overrun. Like, it feels deeply ironic. The smart kids get bullied out.
Oh, I'm definitely with you. But what's the alternative option?
Well, I mean, Minerva could have conquered them. That would have been interesting, right? They in theory, had the upper hand. They obviously beat back Titus. They just didn't hold enough ground against
hypothetically, then, she's still culling people.
So it is about owning, and that's why she ultimately doesn't, right? That's ultimately why there's this period of negotiation and diplomacy between the groups. I also like the image of fucking Titus just like knocking a man out of the tower window. Just classically badass.
Yes. He just fucking like threw him out the window.
Mm-hmm.
I loved it. And everyone else scattered after seeing the body hit.
I mean, like, Titus's excuse is like, I didn't kill enough people in the end, but it's fascinating how incredibly brutal he is throughout these chapters. I don't know. I also love, so we see that, and then we also see Darrow and Cassius raiding the Minerva base, right? Which is so good.
Mm-hmm. Oh, for sure.
I love their raid. I love like them going in and like Darrow deciding that what he needs to do after weeks of having shitty cooked food is to steal the fucking cook. Like him asking people, "Are you June? Are you Jude?" and like punching out anyone that isn't June. It's so good. Until he finds the cook, knocks her out, throws her over his shoulder, and runs back. He's just like, you know what? A good cooked meal will make a big difference. Like, so let's make a slave of the fucking cook. It's so good.
Oh, that's hilarious.
And Cassius specifically. So the line is on 205. June, I call out. She turns into my sunpike and shudders as the electricity dumbs down her muscles. That's how I steal the cook. Cassius finds me running with June over my shoulder through the gardens. What the hell? She's a cook, I explain. And that's just.
And Cassius starts to laugh uncontrollably, which I think I found fucking hilarious.
It's so good. There's so much fun that kind of happens in this section when they're raiding the base. You know, they carve Mars into the table. They break everything. I don't know. I really appreciated like this section of really
carving their name in, even though they actively thought about not doing that. Yeah, exactly.
I also like the line. He likes his curved knives too much. I think he whispers them when he talks about Sevro. it just adds to the perspective of Sevro being absolutely batshit insane.
Absolutely.
It's too good. But Darrow at this point has obviously earned his nickname Reaper. We engage then with House Minerva and we get this whole fight scene, obviously, which escalates with on 209 with Pax au Telemanus as he like howls.
A video game character, if nothing else.
Nothing else. Dude, the guy is terrifying in every way and properly characterized as this giant hinted throughout the chapter. Throughout the section. It's just such a
yeah. Oh, for
my
sure.
external drive is actually named Pax for the record. I'm just letting the record show. I
taken.
love Pax. and it's a brutal introduction to Pax, obviously, but I love him. He's just a monster. He's a monster. I love the bit like he shouts his name at me like I'm a fucking idiot. I think it's on 210. Pax out Telemanus. He beats his large pike against his chest and hits puffy-haired clown so hard my friend flies back 4 meters. He shouts again. Pax out Telemanus and is a pricklicker. I mock. It's like yes. It's just
it's gonna go well
Darrow's
for him.
Just so consciously aware of like making a joke of this man, even though he's a fucking giant. I really like on 212 we get a bit of humanity, right? The war for the most part has been won by Mars. You know, obviously as the fight continues, Pax does tackle the horse and everything else, but manages to conquer majority of the force without actually conquering Pax. Conquer in the sense of like fight back. But Mustang continues to negotiate given the violence of Titus. Like Titus obviously is a bad fucking dude. But I really like the line, gods don't come down in life to mete out justice. The powerful do it. That's what they are teaching us. Not only the pain in gaining power, but the desperation that comes from not having it. The desperation that comes from when you are not a gold. It's on page 212, obviously.
Right.
I think that's so interesting from Darrow's perspective.
Is an amazing quote. Like, I love that quote. It definitely feeds into that conversation with, oh God, what's her name?
Mustang?
Yeah. No. That's not who I'm thinking of. In his grade, I guess, but not in his school.
Oh, Leah. Right. She's the one who's like, well, it's not right. And he scorns her back.
I don't know if that's who I'm thinking of, but I think that works. Anyway, let's continue.
So I love that chunk, and I think it really it's a benediction to some degree of what Mustang also thinks is reality. Mustang believes in proper and fair judgment. Like, she truly embodies a characteristic that I think is very Athenian, very Minervan. And it's interesting. It's more democratic, so to speak, than a lot of the other power structures. But she also gives prelude to a future problem. You should hope that is not true. They are made by the strong. You should hope that's not true. Mustang says quietly to me. Why? because there is a boy here like you. My proctor calls him the Jackal. He is smarter and crueler and stronger than you. And he will win this game and make us his slaves if the rest of us go about acting like animals. So please, hurry up and evolve.
That's a tough thing to hear.
Yeah, so we know that...
From the hotel clerk.
We know that Titus is awful, right? And now we're presented with a picture of the Jackal. It's like, oh, God. What could be worse than Titus?
Apparently
somebody else that's similar to Darrow, right? That she's saying has a similar aptitude or reason. And then on top of that...
Which is impressive.
So we're given that aptitude comparison between the Jackal, which I'll ask a follow-up question on here before we end. But we end, obviously, with Titus. And my question for you is, the Jackal is painted as worse than Titus here by her. What could possibly be worse than Titus in your mind?
Fuck, man. Oh, God. I don't have an answer for this. Straight up, I don't know.
Okay. I mean, I'll take that. I'll take that as an answer. That's fine. So over the next 5 pages, it's an interrogation. The chapter is called My Brother. It's an interrogation of Titus that gradually reveals that he himself is a red, just like Darrow. He slips up and says, bloody damn. In addition to all of this other character reveals that shows that he doesn't care about Gold Society in the way that everyone else does. This is the pause point. This is the cliffhanger that we've left you on. What the fuck do you think about this section?
Oh, God. I just want to read more, man.
Yeah, but what do you think about it?
I don't know. I just want to read more.
Contemplate. Tell me what you're thinking.
It's so I was so pleasantly surprised about this because I felt like last time we did anything similarly, things were not uniform. I have so many thoughts about this episode.
So, Titus, right? Like, It's so clear when we hit this point that something has been wrong with this character that's made him different than every other Gold.
Up until now, he is the corrupted king, so to speak. Like he is the royalty that has been sitting on the throne but eaten from the bottom up.
Corrupted king's a good call. That's totally accurate, right? So he has been feasting on the joys of being a Gold. Right. And also been punishing the Golds for their same luxuries. Right. It has no care in the world about any of that. Like he cuts off, he Van Goghs Quinn without a question. He does that to several women over the course of this episode, over the course of these chapters, and just like mails the ears to people. It's like, haha, I don't give a shit whether or not you're a slave. You'll get it replaced later. It's going to be fine. You're a fucking Gold. I can cut your ear off. If I can't kill you, at the very least, I can brutalize you.
It's so hard to look at this in the same context as what we'll gain in leaning forward for 10 degrees for 15 minutes. Like, things change so much very quickly in this book.
Yeah, right. So the question lies, what does Darrow do about Titus? What do you think Darrow does about Titus?
I think he's very, very lucky that he's already made the stand for keeping Titus as opposed to giving him up to other houses. I think he still has to punish him. I don't think it'll be the same as it was before. I think it'll be more like hey, just so you know, I'm going to have to punch you in the face, but it's for the sake of both of us in keeping our identity safe.
Right. The thing that I would add there is that Darrow knows that Titus is red. Titus does not. Oh,
I think that'll go. I think that will even out quickly because I'm operating under the assumption that Titus learns fairly quickly before the next big battle that Darrow is also a red. And I think that happens very soon out of shock rather than out of a calculated choice to disclose information, if that makes sense.
Sure. I definitely get that. I think it's also a good way of leaning into the storytelling here is to hope that Titus and Darrow can agree to be on the same side. But what if they don't agree to be on the same side?
One of them dies, and I think it's Titus, because he is an ogre of a man, but isn't necessarily as witty. He's smart. He's intelligent. He's able to pass the test, but I don't think he's as witty and as quick in his decision making.
Totally.
So I think if they're in a one-on-one, I think Darrow wins. All things else, everything else equal.
That's totally fair. Okay. So I'm going to call for PJ's predictions right now. So we're gonna switch into that mode, right? Like not evaluating the text, but like call back to what you want. So like you were saying with Titus, you think that Darrow has to either submit Titus or likely kill him. Mm-hmm. Darrow has also promised Titus to Cassius at this point. He said that if anyone is going to kill him, because Darrow himself alluded to the fact that Titus might have killed Julian instead of himself, because Titus is a friend.
All right. Here's my off-the-wall prediction.
Okay.
Digging into both of those. Darrow decides to keep Cassius around. Second, third day, whatever it is. Titus decides to go for a bath. Gets a little drunk. Starts just kind of spewing information. And alludes to, but does not explicitly say anything about being a red. And Darrow happens to be there. And for the betterment of the secrecy of what's going on, he decides to kill. God, I keep wanting to say Cassius. Titus. Kills Titus. That's my prediction. It's a little vague.
Sure.
But I think Titus poses a threat of being not necessarily the most cunning, but he is well equipped to going into battle.
Yeah.
And I think that's helpful.
I can definitely see that. When do you think, talking about Titus and his red heritage, do you think that he is actually employed by the Son of Ares or a different organization? Or how did he get here?
My guess is something similar to Darrow, but probably a high rank.
Okay, but what does something similar to Darrow mean? Like, is he a member of the Son of Ares or is he not? Call it out.
Maybe some interaction with him. I don't think that they would intentionally release two different covert ops without at least warning them of each other based on how like real thorough they were. But I think a similar organization working
could do it
tangentially would do something at the same time. Yeah, exactly. Could do it.
Totally. I get that. Okay. So other prediction or like question that's lingering. So Darrow kind of has the choice or the option to, at the moment, to dominate all of House of Minerva, to trap them, including Mustang. Why doesn't he do that?
Because he's so focused on protecting himself from the rest of House Mars.
Okay. I
think that's the biggest thing, is his exterior is constantly tied to protecting everything. Like,
okay.
He doesn't give himself enough freedom to move forward.
All right. So Here's my final question for you. It's really just kind of the vague one. Any other predictions for next week's reading?
Sometime next week, Cassius learns that Darrow killed his brother.
Ooh, it's a good one.
That's going to happen.
Anything else?
I'm thinking next week that happens.
Yeah. It's good. That's tough. Like, how tough would that be for them as a group?
That'd be tough.
At this point.
I don't really have anything beyond that. That's what I've got.
That's number one. Okay. All right. With that, next week is an all-important 40-page blitz. This is actually going to be the shortest section that we're going to do, and especially that we've done in a long time. But there's a lot that happens in these next 40 pages. It should be exciting. We're reading until the end of part 3, Gold, leaving it on the end of that section before we move into part 4.
So we're reading part 3.
Reading to the end of part 3.
End of part 3. Sorry.
Thank you for listening to Words and Whiskey.
We hope you've built up a tolerance to us. Subscribe to us on your preferred platform like Overcast, Stitcher, Spotify, iTunes, or whatever else you use.
And check us out at our website, wordsandwhiskey.show. We filled our top shelf with our favorite cocktail recipes as well as other important information for you. Check us out on Instagram and Twitter at wordswhiskeypod. All those links and more can be found in our show notes.
A 5-star rating on the platform of your choosing goes a long way to springing us up on them leaderboards and getting us noticed.
We're just two dudes helping encourage people to read and get out of their comfort zone while thinking critically about literature.
Thanks for listening, and we bloody damn better see you next week.